Hey gang, thank you for joining me for Two Texas Lobsters React. And today I've got a real treat for you. We're going to learn about who Max Miller is by watching his video, Making Medieval Mead Like a Viking. Max Miller, very well spoken, seems to be very well educated, has a great following. He brings ancient recipes back to life with a little bit of a twist and a history lesson. I think you're going to love it. So without any further ado, I'd like to share tasting history with Max Miller, Making Medieval Mead Like a Viking. Say that 10 times quick. Okay, here we go.
You ever wonder where the term honeymoon comes from? Well, I'm about to tell you. See, in the Middle Ages, when a young couple got married, their family would give them a moon or a month's worth of honey mead. And then the young couple would go off, frolic, and make merry for a few weeks, and hopefully come back with a bun in the oven. So that's what we're making today. Not a baby, mead. So whether you're a Saxon warrior positioned in your shield wall or a marauding Norse Viking, get ready for that sweet, sweet taste of alcoholic honey, mead. This time on Tasting History. So a bunch of people have been asking me to make merch or merchandise. So there is some that I just got up in the bar beneath this video. But you know what? I would love some ideas about what kind of stuff you guys want, what I should have made, because I'm not very good at that kind of stuff. Anyway.
So he has a great book out. And please don't quote me on this, but I believe it is Tasting History with Max Miller. It's a fantastic book. It's a huge book of old ancient recipes from way back in the day until, I guess probably 100 years ago. I may be misrepresenting his book, but it's a very good book. It looks great. I got to get my hands on one because I love cooking and my wife loves me to cook. Anyway, just kind of wanted to get that plug out there for Max.
Anyway, merch below. More to come. So today's recipe comes from the 13th century Tractus manuscript, Folio 20R. Catchy title. Now usually I read the full recipe, but this recipe is rather long and rather wordy, so I'm just going to give you the hits, but I am going to put the full translation in the description if you care to read the entire thing. For to make mead, take 1 gallon of fine honey, and to that 4 gallons of water, and heat that water till it be as leng. Then dissolve the honey in the water. Then set them over the fire and let them boil, and ever scum it as long as any filth riseth thereon. And then take it down off the fire and let it cool in another vessel, till it be as cold as milk when it cometh from the cow. Then take dregs of the finest ale, or else barm, and cast it into the water and the honey, and stir all well together. And so let it stand 3 days and nights. Then draw it from the dregs as clear as thou may into another vessel clean, and let it stand 1 night or 2, and then draw it into another vessel, and serve it forth. So anyone who makes mead on the regular today is probably thinking, oh, that just doesn't really sound right to me, because mead usually ferments for weeks, not days, and then ages for months, not a couple nights. So this is a quick mead, and probably they would have let it age longer if need be. I don't know. This mead is probably going to be not as alcoholic, very sweet and cloudy, but we shall see. Now the recipe also gives us instructions on how to make this mead eglin by adding various herbs such as hyssop, betony, moonwort, hart's tongue, and white horehound, just to name a few. Kind of sounds like the 3 Weird sisters at the beginning of Macbeth. Woo! Now, eglin is a shortened version of the word medeglin, meaning healing mead, because in medieval recipes, usually when there were herbs added, it was medicinal, because that was the medicine that was most commonly available. And even today, any mead that is made with herbs and spices is called a metheglin, very similar to medeglin. There are actually dozens of terms for all different kinds of mead depending on what you're adding into it and how alcoholic or how much honey is in it. There are tons. And I'm not going to go into them all right now, but there are some great resources, books, in the video description if you really want to kind of get into mead and how to make all the different various forms. But for today, we're sticking with the traditional 3 ingredients: water. Don't use distilled water for this. Mineral or spring water, that's the way to go. honey, and ale dregs or dried ale yeast. So the recipe calls for 4 gallons of water and 1 gallon of honey, but that's a lot. So I am going to be making 1 gallon of water and a quart of honey. And really, as long as you stay with the 4-to-1 ratio, you're going to be good to go. Now, as for the yeast, if you can get ale barm or dregs, fantastic. But if not, you can go ahead and use dry yeast. The thing is, in either case, they didn't tell you how much to use, and it's really going to depend on how active the yeast is. So you're kind of just guessing.
So I have made mead in the past, and mead, of course, is a wine that's made with honey and not grapes, as you have already gotten from the video. If you like mead, or if you like wine, try mead. Mead is wonderful. It's very, very easy to make, and we'll get back into Max's video here and he'll walk us through everything.
What I ended up doing was about 2 tablespoons of barm, and then I put it into a little bit of water with a drop of honey just to make sure that it was active, and it was. If you're using dried yeast, it's hard to say. Usually for a gallon you would use like a pinch, but because we're only doing this for 3 days, fermenting it for 3 days, I'd use a little bit more, maybe like a third of a packet, maybe. So first, if you're worried about bacteria, you can go ahead and sterilize all of the tools that we're going to be using.
Good idea.
Though in the 13th century, they wouldn't have really cared, though they actually kind of have a way around that, so we'll get to that. But it can't hurt to sterilize your equipment. So
what you get if you don't sterilize your equipment is potentially vinegar. You don't want, well, you might want vinegar, but if you don't sterilize, you could get vinegar or just a really foul batch of mead.
What you'll need is a large pot for boiling, a large container for fermenting, another container for aging for all of 2 nights, and preferably like a bottle with a small opening so you can fit a bubbler or airlock. That lets the carbonation out without other things getting in. And then you can also probably use a siphon or a funnel depending on how you plan on getting the mead from one container to the next. Siphon or funnel will definitely make things easier. So following the recipe, we heat our water until it is lang. Now, I could not find anywhere a translation, Middle English, Old English, anything for the word lang. So if anyone knows, great. Otherwise, it really probably just means rather hot, because what you want to be doing is to dissolve the honey in there so it's not just falling to the bottom. So add the honey and give it a mix until it's dissolved. Then boil the honey and water mixture called must. Now, a lot of modern mead makers would not boil it at this point, but I think that's part of the way that they got rid of the bacteria that might have been in the water in the Middle Ages. If you boil it, it'll get rid of most of the bacteria. Also, this thing is going to have alcohol and a ton of honey in it, so there's not going to be a lot left alive no matter what, so you're probably pretty safe. As it boils, skim off any scum that forms at the top. Though you really shouldn't have that much scum unless you're using honey directly from honeycomb, because that can have dirt or pieces of wax in it, and that's really what's going to be bubbling up to the top. Once boiled, take it off the fire and pour it into the second vessel. Hopefully doing a better job than I did, because I spilled a bunch and it got really, really sticky for like days afterward. I couldn't get it to be non-sticky. Then you gotta let that honey and water mixture cool until it is the temperature of milk when it comes out of a cow, about 98 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius. If you put yeast in there before it gets about to that, it could kill the yeast, so just wait. It can take a while, but just wait. Then pour in your dregs or barm or yeast, then cover the top, not airtight, and leave it be out of direct sunlight. You could even put it like in a closet. Now by the next day, the mead should be in what I call the dawn-ho phase of mead making, because you'll see tiny bubbles starting to rise to the top. Oh, sometimes I hate myself for those kinds of jokes. But I don't care.
That's a bad joke, Max.
Makes me laugh. Now, if you were leaving it for longer than 3 days, it would actually start to get clear in this beautiful golden colored mead that we know and love so well. But in 3 days, that ain't gonna happen. So after 3 days, go ahead and transfer it, trying not to get too much of the yeast at the bottom, to that next container or bottle. Then stick a bubbler in it, and let it sit for a couple more nights. Now I'm actually making 2 little bottles out of this gallon, one that I'm going to try, in 2 nights, and then one that I'm going to hold on to for maybe 6 months or so. I want to see how the flavor changes. It's not going to have any more fermentation time from that first fermenting, but the aging hopefully might mellow out the flavor. I don't know. We'll see. So what inspired me to make mead today was actually because of a video game that's coming out today, or the day that this video will air, called Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Not associated with them in any way, but I'm still super excited because it's like a history-based game of like my favorite time period, Saxons and Vikings, fighting it out. So I'm assuming that there's going to be mead in there somewhere. Though when you think of, Saxons and Vikings, yes, you think of mead, but mead actually got its start way before that. The earliest evidence for mead making actually comes from pottery found in northern China dating from about 7000 BC. There was residue from honey and the compounds associated with fermentation. And there are mentions of alcoholic drinks made with honey throughout Chinese literature, including the Song of Mead by Su Shi in the 11th century. In Central Europe, similar residues have been found in the pottery of the bell beaker culture, which roamed Bronze Age Europe more than 4,000 years ago. But the earliest written mention of mead actually comes from the ancient Indian Rig Veda, which says, "I have tasted the sweet drink of life, knowing that it inspires good thoughts and joyous expansiveness to the extreme, that all the gods and all mortals seek it together, calling it mead. High praise indeed for this our mead." Now the drink that they're talking about in the Rig Veda is actually known as soma, which is a honey drink that probably also had some hallucinogens or something in it because it would give visions of the gods. So hopefully not what I'm making today. And while this is the first mention that we have of mead being associated with the gods, it is far from the last. The Minoan culture produced mead and credited it to their mother goddess Potnia, whose priestesses were named Melissa, meaning bee. The love that the Minoans had for this drink passed on to the other Greek civilizations. They also used these same Melissae as priestesses for Artemis and Demeter, and the drink eventually made its way to the Roman Empire. Columella gives us a recipe in De Re Rustica, as does Pliny the Elder in Naturalis Historia. There is a wine also made solely of honey and water. For this purpose, it is recommended that rainwater should be kept for a period of 5 years. This beverage is known as hydromeli, and with age acquires the flavor of wine. It is nowhere more highly esteemed than in Phrygia. Now aren't you glad I said to use spring water rather than make you go get rainwater and wait 5 years? You're welcome. Now after the fall of Rome, our mead journey takes us north to Britannia, or Britain. In one Welsh poem from around 550 AD called Canu I Mead, we hear of that iconic drinking vessel for mead, the mead horn. Me maelgun of Mona.
There is a place in Arizona, I want to say it's Glendale or Avondale, and it is called Scale and Feather, and it is a meadery, and it's a wonderful meadery, and they have all types of different meads, all different flavors. Some are sweet, some are spicy, but they sell the mead horns, and I could kick myself for not getting one because you know what? You got to get the whole experience. You know what I mean? Just mead in a glass is one thing, but mead in a mead horn, you're practically a Viking at that point.
Be affected with mead, and affect us from the foaming mead horns with the choicest pure liquor, which the bees collect and do not enjoy. Mead distilled sparkling, its praise is everywhere. So the mead in that poem is sparkling, which is interesting because based on what I've seen with our mead, ours is also going to be sparkling.
I don't like
in another Welsh poem, Gododin, we hear the story of a battle where those fighting were rather hungover from too much mead. Men went to Catraeth at morning, their high spirits lessened their lifespan. They drank mead, golden sweet and snaring.
I don't know if you've watched my video about prohibition and the fall of the Russian Empire. I will try to get it on to an end tag at the end of this video, but the same thing happened to the Russian army because of vodka. Too much drinking before battle is not a good thing. Too much drinking before anything is not a good thing. Too much drinking is not a good thing. Moderation.
For a year, the minstrels were merry. Their high spirits lessened their lifespan. How Welsh. Anyway, I wanted to actually thank a Welshman, the Welsh Viking, here on YouTube, named Jim, for helping me with a bunch of the research and the pronunciation, as well as letting me know that the Welsh word for drunk is meddwi, which literally means meaded. I love that. Now, at about the same time that these Welshmen were lessening their lifespan with mead, the Irish were drinking it too, just across the water on the hill of Tara, where the banquet hall was known as Cech Mithorda, the mead circling house, which I can only imagine is rather similar to Hrothgar's mead hall, Hjorut, in Beowulf, where Grendel would rip apart drunken Danes. They would willingly wait on their wassailing benches, a grapple with Grendel with grimmest of edges. Then this mead hall at morning with murder was reeking. The building was bloody at breaking of daylight. The bench deals all flooded, dripping and bloodied. Now let us pause right there while I beseech thee, if you have never read Beowulf, or if you only read it under duress in high school or college, go get a copy because it is so great. And it is good. Super quick to read. It's not very long. I'm going to put my favorite translation in the description, but really any translation.
I remember reading Beowulf, and I remember reading The Green Knight, which was another great story of the time. If you have not read Beowulf, read it. Get you a bottle of mead, a mead horn, and a copy of Beowulf, and your night will be set.
Works. Don't watch the movie, but it's fantastic. And whoever wrote it, we don't know, but whoever wrote it really was the greatest of poets, or skalds, and must have gotten that from Odin, because Odin made good skalds. And that brings us to Norse mythology. Following a war between two factions of the Norse gods, they decided to call a truce in the same way that we do today by spitting into a giant cauldron. Well, out of this godly saliva rose a creature, a man, god, not really specific, named Kvasir, and he was all-knowing. He was the most brilliant poet and had all of the knowledge that there was to be had. Even the gods would ask him questions that they needed to know. Well, when Kvasir wasn't busy, he liked to go down to Midgard, where the humans lived, and pass on some of his knowledge. How kind of him. Well, one day he came across two dwarves named Fjalar and Galar, who said, "Come on in, we'll make you some mead." And that's what they proceeded to do. They made him some mead. They slit him open with knives and drained his blood into 3 vats, then added honey to it to create mead. How dark. But that mead supposedly gave some of his power if you drank it. So it was called the Mead of Poetry. But old Kvasir was, of course, missed by the gods, who were like, "Hey, dwarves, where's our smart guy?" And the dwarves were like, "Oh no, you know what? He came over and he was so smart that he choked on his own knowledge and died." And they believed him. Well, these two jerk dwarves weren't done with their little killing spree, because a little while later they killed a couple, a husband and wife, who were giants. And the giant's son was like, no. So he came over and took the dwarves and set them on an island that was about to flood so they would die. But the dwarves were like, "Hey, if you don't kill us, you can have this mead of poetry that we've got." And the giant was like, "Okay," and let them go. And now their part of the story is completely done. It's kind of weird. But the giant didn't drink the mead himself. He actually just kind of hoarded it and gave it to somebody else to protect. And when Odin, played by Anthony Hopkins, found out, he decided, "I need this mead of poetry," because Odin prided himself on his love of knowledge and poetry. Anyway, after a bunch of scheming and shape-shifting, Odin was allowed to have 3 sips, 1 from each vat of the mead. But joke's on them, because an Odin sip is like the sip that I'm going to take if you offer me a drink of your cocktail. He drained it dry, all 3 vats in 3 little sips, or huge sips, I guess. Then he turned into an eagle, and with the Steve Miller Band playing behind him, flew home to Asgard and regurgitated the mead into his own 3 containers. But he dropped a few drops down to Midgard where the humans live. And those drops are said to be the beginning of all mediocre poetry in the world. Because to be a great poet or skald, you have to get your mead directly from Odin himself. And I'm pretty sure that whoever wrote Beowulf got their mead directly from Odin himself. Now, the mead that I'm making today, I'm not going to guess is going to make me into a great poet, but maybe if you drink enough of it and you kind of get a little chatty, you'll think you're a great poet, because that has definitely happened to me in the past with mead. Anyway, let's give it a shot. So once 2 nights have passed, pour the mead into that final clean vessel, and it's ready to drink. Oh dear. Oh, no. Okay. Well, that was embarrassing. My ale horn seems to be leaking. That's not good. Nobody likes a leaky ale horn. So instead, I'm using a beer mug. That's okay. So let's go ahead and try this mead. It smells very yeasty still. I guess is to be expected.
He only aged it for 3 days, so yeah.
I like it. You know what? It's not as... When I poured it, it was effervescent, but when you drink it, you don't really get it. It's pretty flat. There's definitely some alcohol in there, though I don't know how much, because I didn't... You can find out.
Hardly
there are ways
any.
You can test it and everything. I didn't do it. Definitely alcoholic, though. And definitely super sweet. I think it would mellow if I gave it some more time, which I'm going to do. Obviously not fermenting, but I am going to leave it in that second bottle, maybe 6 months. Maybe in 6 months, we do another episode on something else, and I drink the rest of the mead, and we see how it goes. Anyway, go make yourself some mead. It's actually not that hard. Just take some time and enjoy life and enjoy poetry. And I will see you next time on Tasting History.
So, thank you for joining me. Please check out Tasting History with Max Miller, an excellent channel full of knowledge and skill and artistry. I really do enjoy watching him. I haven't tried a single recipe that he has put out, but hopefully one day I will get to it. Hopefully one day soon, in fact. But thank you so much for joining me. Please subscribe. I'm in a very critical point of the channel right now. I'm trying to get subscribers. I'm trying to get noticed. Please, if you enjoyed the video, like, share, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much for joining me at 2 Texas Lobsters React. Have a great day.